That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about My Dead Friend Zoe, which premiered at the 2024 South by Southwest Film Festival. It's being released courtesy of Briarcliff Entertainment on February 28th, 2025.
How did I know you would have a Sacha Baron Cohen reading of Zoe?
Shout out to that very uh how would you, The Dictator, the 2012 movie. That's very so-so.
Oh, the director.
It's directed by Kyle Hausmann-Stokes. It's his debut. I believe there was an earlier short film that also helped in getting him to where he is with the feature.
Directorial debut. What is My Dead Friend Zoe about? Engaged in a mysterious relationship with her dead best friend from the army, a female Afghanistan veteran comes head to head with her Vietnam vet grandfather at the family's ancestral lake house. What is your pull quote?
While the film doesn't ultimately match the strength of a lead performance from Sonequa Martin Green, My Dead Friend Zoe is often emotionally compelling and a unique approach to the examination of PTSD.
Hmm. Mine. A somewhat bumpy ride leads to an emotional payoff that makes My Dead Friend Zoe worth your time. I will say the movie did not take me where I thought it would.
We saw a trailer for this at something, and it's a very well cut trailer, and I was assuming I would have kind of a different response to the actual film, but it does have some tear-jerking moments for sure.
It does. So the story is about an Army veteran named Merritt, played by Sonequa Martin Green. And we see that she served in the Army for 8 years and did not re-enlist because her intention was to go to college. But we see her deployed in Afghanistan, and she's there with a fellow soldier named Zoe, played by Natalie Morales. And we see that they have a very close friendship. But it's also clear that Zoe is afraid of life outside of the military. Like, that's all she knows how to do. And her intention is to re-enlist. But Merritt thinks that she should leave and try to find something else to do. So throughout the film, we keep flashing back to these two women in the army in Afghanistan talking about what their plans are afterwards. And you would assume, based on the title, and it's made very clear that once Merritt returns home from Afghanistan, that she's hallucinating by seeing Zoe with her. So Zoe has died, but we don't know how. And the allusion to how Zoe died is tethered like for the entire runtime of the movie. And you would assume that she died maybe like in like battle or friendly fire or an accident in
Yeah.
Afghanistan.
Mhm.
But a few things are happening now that Merritt has returned home. She's clearly having some serious mental health issues. She has mandated therapy, and her therapist is played by the great Morgan Freeman. Also, Merritt's mother is saying to her, like, you need to go check on your grandfather. There was an incident. I think that maybe he needs to be moved to a nursing home. So you need to go to the family's ancestral lake house where the grandfather lives alone. And the grandfather is played by Ed Harris. You need to
And
go.
the mother's played like Gloria Reuben, by the way, who's in Hong Kong.
Yes. But the mom tells Merritt, you need to go get your grandfather and prepare him to move. But when we meet Ed Harris, it's clear that he is not going anywhere. Um, but
Shout
he's
out to Laurence Olivier and Boys from Brazil.
but Ed Harris's character is also a veteran. But everything sort of culminates in Merritt confronting Zoe and realizing that she needs to let go in order to move on. And I think a big catalyst for Merritt realizing that is her grandfather and realizing that she needs to snap out of it so she can help her grandfather. And that's exactly what she does. One day she just decides, I'm not going to be mentally ill anymore, I guess. And then she tells her mom, let's not move grandfather into a nursing home. I'll move into the lake house and take care of him. And then all's well that ends well. This movie it did feel to me kind of like a commercial for like an antidepressant medication where you see like the dark clouds and then all of a sudden it's like, let your new life begin.
Yeah, I think that it depends on a lot of cliches and tropes, even though I think it does have some unique things going on for it, but then it's padded with all of these detail and elements that I really don't think it needs and kind of bogs it down. And we're probably going to get into this a little more, but how Natalie Morales is portrayed as Zoe, who is kind of like comedic relief to the audience. Um, I don't I don't really like how that plays ultimately.
I I hate to say it, but my least favorite part of the film is the character Zoe, played by Natalie Morales. I found her grating. I think ultimately when we realize what happened to her and the depths of her relationship with Merritt, I just think this character is written so oddly. She's, I mean, she's just annoying. I just found her so annoying.
And you mean annoying as the dead apparition because again, she's there to supply laughs for the audience because Zoe's not reacting to her when other people are around, and that's often when we get quips from her.
Sure. But so what did happen to Zoe? It isn't what we think it is. When right before the two women were about to return home, basically Merritt promises Zoe, hey, do not re-enlist. I will be there for you. You won't be alone. I'll be there for you. But then we see when both ladies return that Merritt is preoccupied with university. And we see her ignoring her friends' calls. We see Zoe like in her dingy room smoking cigarettes and drinking brown liquor, clearly declining. It all feels a little familiar. And then ultimately, Zoe shoots and kills herself. And that's the emotional payoff that I mean, I was not expecting that. And I almost wish that we would have focused more on how these two women drifted apart after returning
Yeah.
home and how Zoe needed Merritt so much more than Merritt realized. And I do think that Sonequa does a fantastic job, but I don't get a sense really about what her character needs or wants. She just seems guilt-ridden. Like that's her entire personality is that she just feels guilty.
Well, guilt can be quite strong and profound and have a long-lasting effect. But
Yeah.
I think where the dimension of how close their friendship is and the spiraling of Zoe, I think needed to be a little better articulated because once we get that reveal, and then of course the statements at the end credits, which we should talk more about too, um, realizing that this is a film about, especially in the period that it's set, a lack of resources for veterans dealing with mental health issues and what that entails. But the way that what we get to see of Zoe, I mean, that was like from a TV movie of the week about depressed teenagers killing themselves.
Right, right. So I think the writing of this story is strongest in relation to like veterans affairs per se. But when it comes to the actual like psychology of it all, I think that was lacking. It feels very simplified. And the fact that, I mean, Merritt literally just snaps out of it. It's like one day I'm going to be well, and it's like sunshine and rainbows. That felt a little odd.
Well, and,
But
and it culminates because also Dr. Cole, Morgan Freeman, is chasing her down, literally saying, I can't clear you for this therapy if you don't actually share. And it all culminates in Merritt being able to say her name, and that kind of releases her from the spell.
well, let's keep talking about that because I we see two group therapy sessions, which was interesting because like understanding how sick Merritt is, it seems like she needs intense one-to-one therapy, not like court-ordered group therapy. But we see her attend two group therapy sessions and she does not want to participate, mainly because we see Zoe there distracting her. Because, like you mentioned, Zoe is convincing Merritt that if you tell anyone about me, I'll go away. Meaning that if people realize how quote unquote crazy you are, they're going to get you help that will subdue me. And that's made very clear. Although I mean, again, it's like Merritt's character is not well, and the way it's played out is like kind of like cutesy. It's very much like you said, made for TV. I had written down like an ABC Family movie, or like on this week's special episode of Step by Step,
Well,
Sasha deals with depression or something.
I think that's the difficulty with employing that as a technique because my first note was Lila and Eve with Viola Davis and Jennifer Lopez.
Oh, well, so since you mentioned Lila and Eve, I thought this story reminded me of the annihilation of fish. Like,
Oh God, yeah, with James Earl Jones believing that he's fighting a spirit that wants to box him all the time.
wrestle him,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
but not just the parallel, like the hallucination and all that, but also just the depiction of mental illness being kind of rudimentary and comical
Mhm.
is an interesting choice that I don't know fully worked for me.
Yes, because what I think it does well, as you already mentioned, is I think dealing with the relationship of Ed Harris, Dale, as a veteran, and his granddaughter, who, she was inspired by him, but it's this situation that kind of forces her to, kind of confront this thing that's been festering because that's how life works. You can't let some things fester forever.
So we kind of get a hint at what's to come early on because we see the two women in Afghanistan sitting at their base, just shooting the shit. And Zoe tells Merritt, if I like when we return, if I ever have to go to therapy, like if I'm one of those people who needs therapy, just kill me. Like, oh wow, okay. But yeah, I thought I just thought Zoe was so obnoxious and I hated that her character is like part of the action, almost like she's a ghost, like metaphysical.
Mhm.
I kind of wish she would have been really just more in Merritt's head and not affecting the environment. Meaning, like, we see Zoe move things and pick up things and open the microwave and turn on the radio. And
Corporeal, yeah. Like, but then again, she's moving Ed Harris's shit around in that cabin, but not really.
well, speaking of that, and this is so minor, but it bothered me so much, is when Merritt first gets to her grandfather's lake house. Of course, Zoe is in tow. They walk into the house, and Zoe's rummaging through the kitchen cabinets and finds milk in the cabinet, like where the cereal should be. And that's to show that Ed Harris is probably losing it. But Merritt grabs that milk and puts it right back in the refrigerator. And that bothered me so much. That's my fear at the grocery store when like the employees find like chicken in like the cereal aisle and then they just go put it back in the refrigerated case. Like you don't know how long it's been out.
Here, there's a protocol for determining, but yeah, of
Well, let's
course.
hope so. Okay. While the comedic components of Zoe's character bothered me, I did think that there's another side character that I don't think we really needed, but he worked a little better. And that's the character of Alex, played by
Utkarsh Ambudkar, who we've seen in a ton of stuff,
I
usually in the same capacity.
I like him. Like he's a nice spice. I don't know that we need this character because like you were saying to me before we hit record,
Yeah, that I think it's also a trope and a cliche that we have to give her at the same time as all this other stuff's going on. let's give her a potential romantic interest because she couldn't be suffering from this and already be in a committed relationship. And I also think it dispels any possibility that there was a lesbian relationship between these two women. So that kind of satisfies that because as we learn from the end credits, this is based on the director's own experiences with two of his friends who came back and later killed themselves. And before we hit record, we were talking about it's interesting that he chose to make it two women. One, because I think culturally we are better able to accept women being vulnerable and has having strong friendships. And I think that it's an easier sell. But I also think now that you say it, or bring him up again, that I think that he's used as a catalyst in a couple scenes, but I think it's really to dispel that there was any romantic interest between the ladies.
That's what I thought his character was intended for, to show that Merritt is not a lesbian. Because she even says, because, it's not uncommon for lesbians to be hit on by men, but then we even hear Merritt say, like, oh, I haven't been in a date with a guy in a while, like, because of everything that's been going on. But the way Merritt meets Alex is Merritt is at the gravesite and it appears there's a landscaper there making with like a weed whacker being very loud. And Merritt gets upset. And it's like, first of all, when do you want landscaping to work? They're not going to work in the middle of the night. And also, don't you want your loved one's gravesite to be well manicured? So I thought that her reacting to that felt very, I mean, even though she's clearly extremely mentally ill, so maybe having an unreasonable outburst isn't that ridiculous, but I felt like she was being a little unreasonable. But the landscaper is Alex, and he's not a landscaper. His loved ones are buried there as well. And he's saying, well, I started landscaping around my own parents' grave, and then I realized, well, it doesn't really look good that mine look good, no one else's. So now I just do everyone's. And so then they have a little meet cute, I guess. But then we find out that Alex is not just the guy at the graveyard. He owns and operates the local nursing home that Ed Harris is supposed to go to. So thankfully, his character is there, I guess, to help Merritt with that. Yeah. I feel
Also,
like,
that's too
oh,
convenient.
yeah. I mean, I feel like it's too much to have his character serve both purposes. It would have just been better for me if he would have just been the nice guy who operates the nursing home and sort of, you know, because we're told that that nursing home is very popular. It's probably like most assisted living places are, meaning that they have a wait list. But because he knows and likes Merritt, he says, well, I'll give you a little extra time to try to figure it out before I release the room. The the highlight of the movie to me is Ed Harris playing this veteran with, cognitive decline. He's perfectly sort of gruff, but sweet. There's a moment when he's trying to explain to his granddaughter, he has like six different trash cans, and like all the trash has to be separated. And when he finds out that Merritt has put the wrong trash in the wrong bin for a second time, he blows up on her
Oh
ass.
yeah.
Paper goes in goddamn six. But when he was explaining it to her, I'm like, I would never be able to get it. I would never. I can barely handle three bins, let alone six.
Yeah, it sounded very complex. But also clearly he has a lot of issues that he's never been able to work out. But Ed Harris is always pretty good.
Well, let's talk about that because I know that this movie was telling a different story, but I think the highlight of this story is when Ed Harris and his granddaughter, Merritt, sort of have a moment where they talk about basically how they're both veterans from different generations and how when Ed Harris's character returned home from the war, he was not well received. He actually had to change out of his uniform when he landed because people were like, there were anti-war protesters, and he's like, I still got spit on. And then there were no fancy terms like PTSD for what I was dealing with, and there certainly weren't any therapists to help me. And then now you didn't even engage in hand-to-hand combat. You come home to like a parade at the airport, and then they're forcing you to go to therapy. And here you are, you can't even handle life. I thought that moment felt, I mean, I could watch a movie just about that, like those two characters sort of relating to each other as veterans from two different generations. Then we see them go to a 4th of July event. And I thought
Mhm.
that was really sweet. Because not only are they two veterans from different generations, but they're family. And then it's also like a biracial family. And I think there's a lot of texture there that worked really well.
But
Well,
I also think that could have been explored a little
yeah.
more. And I feel like if we'd explored, I think their family dynamics, and cut off some of this cliched fat around it, it would have been a lot more interesting.
So, like I said in my pull quote, the emotional payoff is pretty significant because I was kind of rocked knowing that many veterans succumb to suicide. It was still quite shocking because the buildup to it was just so clear to me that it was going to be something that happened in Afghanistan. That being said, I do think the buildup at a point became tedious because I mean, we flash back to it like eight, nine times. Like, okay, well, what happened? And then, like at the two-thirds point, we get an extended scene of Merritt and Zoe at the base, and Zoe sort of freaks out. And like, there's also this symbol of like what do you call those lights? Like a glow stick. We keep seeing this glow stick, and then at that two-thirds point, when we see Zoe getting upset and they're at the base, and Zoe like walks outside of the base holding the glow sticks, I thought for sure, like, oh, that's going to be a symbol of her attracting like the enemy and getting shot.
I thought that as well, yeah.
But then no, it's not. So I think they do take the gag like a little too far. Because at that point, I'm like, what happened to her ass? Like, what happened? You already mentioned this, but the way Zoe's decline is represented once she returns home did feel very rushed. And I would
Yeah.
have liked to have spent more time with that. And then finally, I think another moment that got me emotionally is when Merritt finally confronts Zoe and admits, and she says, you would still be alive if it weren't for me. And that was pretty powerful because in reality, it's like she can't be held that responsible
Right.
her friend not being able to cope with life and the choices she's made. So overall, this is effective
Yeah, I agree.
with some really good performances.
Particularly from Sonequa and Ed, yeah.
And then we didn't mention at the end of the film, we know that it's based on a true story, and we see the two men who were the inspiration. But we also learned that a very significant number of veterans who return home commit suicide. And in the case of the soldiers who we talked about in this story, the number of soldiers who died from suicide is significantly greater than the number who died in battle. So that,
Right.
I mean, that's alarming.
Yeah, that tells a different story, yeah.
Yeah. What would you give My Dead Friend Zoe?
2.5.
It does work for me. I would give it 3 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.